The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. A London whale gets beached and loses $2 billion. Is it a foreshadowing of global warming? Nope, it's a foreshadowing of economic collapse. Why hasn't Wall Street learned anything from 4 years ago? More specifically, why haven't the American people learned they need to regulate Wall Street? Majority Leader Harry Reid made clear that Wall Street was gambling today, and hosts on Fox News and CNBC were shocked that Reid would use such a terrible word as gambling to describe Wall Street. Besides, what does Harry Reid know about gambling? He's only a senator from Nevada. Also in the news, we have Facebook tries its initial public offering. A big flop, really. It's not that I'm attacking Facebook. Facebook has its own uses. It's enough of a company. But why did its IPO fail? Again, the answer is greed. Speaking of greed, there is a greedy Speaker of the House, the head of the Republican Party in the House, who says that if he doesn't get his way, if we don't do everything exactly the way he wants, he's going to drive the United States into economic catastrophe. That's right. We can have a depression bigger than the Great Depression. Yes, we can. Well, Speaker Boehner needs to go to his room. And the way the president can send him there is via the Constitution. I'll explain how. I have the inside scoop. So lots going on in the news all this week. We have Greece fighting to stay alive, fighting its own economic depression, being forced upon by Germany and other European nations to practice austerity at exactly the wrong time. What lessons can we learn about Greece, other than the fact that you get in trouble when you don't have a Federal Reserve? Are you listening, Ron Paul? Let's start with the JP Morgan mess, because it's very important to understand exactly what went on, both at JP Morgan and, frankly, with the collapse of Wall Street just 4 years ago. How soon we forget. It all has to do with those pesky little instruments called credit derivative swaps. Now, Wall Street is gambling on the fact that when I say the words credit derivative swaps, your eyes immediately glaze over. You say, that's too complex. I can't possibly understand them. Wall Street, I guess, knows what it's doing. I'm going to go on my own way and vote for Mitt Romney. Credit derivative swaps are a time bomb. They are an economic time bomb. They are a financial time bomb. They are the time bomb that blew up the nation's economy 4 years ago, and the smaller time bomb that blew up in the London whale's face. The London whale being Bruno Ixel, a trader who put on regularly $100 billion trades in London. So what is a credit default swap? What does it do? Why is it a time bomb? Why should you care? Well, the reason you should care about credit default swaps is that they are designed to be an insurance contract. Now, they don't call it an insurance contract because if you call it insurance, then the states and the federal government regulates it, and we can't allow them to do that. But it's an insurance against somebody else not paying their debts. An insurance against somebody else not paying their debts. So the idea is you buy something that's risky. You buy some kind of bond or instrument or mortgage loan portfolio that you know is not a good bet. But to protect your bad bet, you buy insurance on your bet, so if your bet goes bad, the insurance pays off. I want you to think about how this is supposed to work. It's supposed to work like a perpetual motion machine. You ever seen that in science? The idea is that the machine keeps turning on its own without any force whatsoever. Physicists say it's impossible. They also say, in economics, there's no such thing as a free lunch. A credit derivative swap tries to be a free lunch. It says, I'm going to make money on this investment, and if I don't, I'm going to make money on my insurance. Either way, I'm going to make money without risk. What's wrong with this equation? It's not possible. You cannot have a free lunch. You cannot make money without risk, just like you can't have a perpetual motion machine. You see, for every transaction you do in the stock market, someone else does an equal and opposite transaction. For every dollar you make, somebody else loses a dollar. That's the way the money market works. So how can you have a riskless asset? If I am buying something that's a bad bet, and I lose that bet, and then I buy insurance, it has to be that the payouts end up the same. Otherwise, the people on the other side of the transaction, right, they would always lose. And nobody makes a bet that they always lose. So how is it that Wall Street makes bets and always wins? There's no way to do it. Like I said, they can't find enough stupid people out there. There's not always a mark. You can't always make money. Well, you can if the mark is the taxpayer. You can if you put one over on the taxpayer. See, it works something like this. When I go in and I play Wall Street Roulette, or maybe Wall Street Craps is a better example, I roll the dice, and I bet that it's not going to be snake eyes. I bet that 2 ones will not come up. And you know what? 35 times out of 36, the probability and statistician people tell us, double ones won't come up. It's a rare roll. So I make money every time double ones don't come up. And in the case of Bruno Ixel, the London whale, he made $15 million. That's just for himself, not for the bank. That's his salary, because he was making bets and they were paying off. And the thing about his bets is they had a rare chance of going wrong. But just like when you play craps, snake eyes sometimes does come up. And if it comes up and you lose everything, your bets weren't that good to begin with, right? You make $1 million every time you don't roll snake eyes, but you lose $1 billion when you do. It's a bad bet, even if it will probably work. This is pretty basic probability. It's pretty basic finance. But JP Morgan, supposedly the safest bank in the United States, with its wonderful CEO, Jamie Dimon, a person who is so smart, he told us, that he could avoid exactly what happened in the Second Great Depression. You see, in 2008, when all the other banks were failing, JP Morgan was left like an island in the storm. Everyone else was sinking. JP Morgan was floating because they weren't making those risky bets. So he told us. So after that debacle, after the worst recession since the Great Depression, the Democrats, under Chris Dodd and Barney Frank, came up with some regulation. Basically, it wasn't that new. It was kind of putting back Glass-Steagall, putting back a law that existed since the 1930s to protect us from the last depression. What Glass-Steagall did is it said, very simply, that banks and brokerage firms are separate things. Banks and brokerage firms could not mix. That may seem like an old-fashioned rule. Indeed, in 1999, they considered it so old-fashioned that they got rid of their silly rule. But why is it that we don't want banks and brokerage firms to mix? Why does it matter? Well, the answer is banks are insured by American taxpayers. They're insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And even though that money comes from banks themselves, at the end, it's backstopped by the American taxpayer. Well, do we want that? Is that a good idea? Actually, it is. The FDIC is probably the single most successful government program. Virtually no one dislikes it. It prevents the bank runs that we had in the Great Depression. You know, you've seen those stories, those black and white movies of people standing in line trying to get their money out of the banks in the 1930s. They had a run on the banks. Nobody trusted them. No one knew which bank would open in the morning. What the FDIC does is the FDIC is a government guarantee. It says, to its credit, that if you deposit up to $250,000, used to be $100,000, but it's been increased. If you deposit up to $250,000 in one bank account, you won't lose a dime. And since the FDIC was created in the 1930s, no one has lost a dime. If banks go bad, they get money out of the FDIC, everyone's paid off. Well, but there's a problem there. I mean, if banks make money by placing bets and they get paid off if they make bad bets, then banks have an incentive to make the riskiest bets available. Let's face it, the more risk you take, the more money you make. That's another basic of finance, right? If I'm going to risk a lot of money, I will get a lot of money for that. So if banks know they take a big risk, if they make money, it goes to them privately. And if they lose money, it comes from the taxpayer. Well, there's an incentive to make a big risk. Luckily for banks, banking practices are not that risky. 30-year loans, particularly when the bank keeps the loan and doesn't slice it and dice it and give it to Wall Street. But if the bank keeps the loan, they've got the property. Housing property keeps the money up. And most banking practices are not that risky. The stock market is a lot riskier. You don't have to go back to 1929. It rises, it falls, sometimes dramatically. And there's nothing wrong with gambling in the stock market, but what's wrong is gambling in the stock market with other people's money. There's a third business, it's called insurance companies, that also has to be separate, has to be regulated. Why do we want this evil, awful government regulation? Well, really, it's very simple. If you are buying insurance, you want to know that if you go to Allstate or State Farm or Geico and your house burns down or you get in a car wreck, that company has the money to pay you back. The worst thing in the world would be to pay your premium year after year after year and your house burns down and the company says, oops, sorry, we ran out of money. It's kind of like the health insurance companies, you know, where you pay year after year after year and then you get sick and then they cut you off. It's not fair. And if your insurance is going to be cut off when you have a problem, there's no reason to buy insurance in the first place. So the government for a long time has required insurance companies to keep reserves, to keep them behind, to know that you are going to be covered if you're in trouble. So what's the problem? The problem is Wall Street wants to mix all these things up. Wall Street has created credit derivative swaps, which are insurance on somebody else's bet. The idea is, sounds good. If my bet fails, I have insurance on my bet. But remember, there's always someone on the other side of those transactions. And there is no sure thing. There is no free lunch. There must be a chance for these things to go wrong, or no one would take the other side of such a bet. It's basic finance, and it's something that the smartest man on Wall Street, J.P. Diamond, should have understood. It is something that ex-Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker understands, and that's why his rule has to be practiced and put forward by the SEC. We'll be talking about that rule if you want to call in and let your voice be heard. The number's 571-749-1166. Back in.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs or to make a tax-free donation, contact C. Fripp at AOL.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America, and reading is...
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. So Congress was determined to prevent what happened in 2008 from ever happening again. Again, what happened in 2008? Well, companies bought these things called credit default swaps. Supposedly they were insurance against the whole thing defaulting. But as I said, in every transaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Every buyer on Wall Street has a seller. Every seller has a buyer. Every person that makes millions, there's somebody else who loses millions. So who was on the other side of all these transactions? A once great insurance company named AIG, the American Insurance Group. An insurance group so powerful that it combined several insurance groups together and was an insurance company for more than 1/3 of every American business. It was big, and it failed, and it was too big to fail. What does it mean to be too big to fail? There are people that say, why not just let it fail? Why do we have to bail out the banks? Why should we give in to these people who made these terrible bets? What a stupid idea is that? And the Bush administration famously let Lehman Brothers fail. And when it did, the disaster was so dramatic, the catastrophe so large, that nobody in America could get a loan for several days. Now, if you understand how a modern economy works, you've got to have loans. You've got to have debt. The farmer has got to borrow money on his crops. The small business owner has got to borrow money to pay his bills. The entrepreneur has got to borrow money to finance his venture capitalism. Everybody needs debt. Everybody needs loans, right? So, I mean, even the school teacher might have to borrow money to get the books for his kids. I'm not sure about that. Look, when credit dries up, when the banker can't make a loan to her fellow banker, then the lifeblood of the American economy drops. Our gross domestic product dropped like a stone, dropped some 9%. That's levels not seen in the Great Depression because it happened so quickly, so fast. That's because when something is too big to fail, much like a whale, right? You could deal with a fish up on shore, but a whale is a lot harder to deal with. And when you have a very large corporation fail, a very large bank or brokerage firm, suddenly nobody knows who to trust. We end up back in the 1930s where people have runs on the bank because they don't know which banks to trust. So I'm afraid the bailout was necessary, even though we all hated it. So the question is, how do we prevent this from happening again? Well, Congress passed a terrific law. Not a perfect law. No law is perfect. But back when the Democrats controlled Congress, Chris Dodd in the Senate and Barney Frank in the House passed a bill called the Dodd-Frank Bill. And the Dodd-Frank Bill says that companies cannot be too big to fail. It brings back most of the old Glass-Steagall law and says that banks have to act like banks, and insurance companies have to act like insurance companies, and brokerage firms act like brokerage firms, and all of them can gamble with their own money, but they can't gamble with the public's money, and they can't gamble and make gambles that are too big to fail. So what happened in London? In London, Bruno Ixel, otherwise known as the London Whale, or Voldemort was his other nickname, was making $100 billion bets. The scandal of the J.P. Morgan loss is not that he screwed up and lost $2 billion. The scandal is that to this day, a company can still make $100 billion bets. What if he'd lost it all? I realize that $2 billion is fairly small in the J.P. Morgan world, but that only proves that this thing could have gotten a lot worse. If the regulators hadn't discovered it, let's face it, no one would have known about J.P. Morgan. So what do you think about the Volcker Rule? Should it be implemented? Should people stop this gambling on Wall Street, or are we designed 4 years later to have this happen again? Let me know what you think. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, or you can call locally, 571-749-1166. Dominic from Falls Church, welcome to the Inside Scoop. Dominic, are you there? Okay, while we're waiting for Dominic, do we have him there? Okay, well, we're waiting for a phone call. Again, if you want to dial in, we encourage you to do so. whether you agree or disagree. So Paul Volcker is the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. He's 84 years old, but he still is a very smart man. In fact, he's the one who saved us from the stagflation of the 1970s. If you remember the 1970s, you know that that was a time of very high unemployment and very high inflation, and yet the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, managed to save us from that. You'd think he might know something about Wall Street. Hey, Dominic from Falls Church, are you there now with me? Okay, while they're getting Dominic.
Right,
oh, yes.
There's kind of a delay. I can see you on the screen.
All right, I can hear you. Go ahead, Dominic. What's your thought,
Mr.
question?
Levine, I've heard your radio program on AM.
Yes.
I wanted to, and I'd like to ask you, as the creation of a common monetary in Europe, did this add to the creation of a global economic disaster where like you've got all these different countries in Europe that created a euro, which is like, Europe's answer to like the common money we've got in the 50 states, which we call a dollar?
That's a great question. In fact, I was going to get it later on in my broadcast, but since you asked, I'll answer it now. Yes, the euro is a problem. I remember when it all combined back in the 1990s, and I thought it was a mistake then. I still think it's a mistake now. The reason why it's a mistake is that each of the European countries, just turn down the sound from your phone, please. Let's turn down the sound from Dominic there. So the reason why the euro is a mistake is that each of the individual nations, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, Spain, each of them has their own fiscal policy. Their own governments decide how much to tax and spend. But there's only one central bank, and that controls the monetary policy. And so Greece doesn't have power over whether or not to issue more drachmas or not. It doesn't control the drachmas, it's the euro. What that means is that when Greece and Germany grow at different rates, the way countries normally deal with that is they appreciate or devalue their currency, and that deals with the difference. That's why poor nations tend to have cheaper prices and poorer currency. That's how they sell their goods. But Greece can't do that. Now, it would be okay if Germany simply bailed out Greece. You point out in the United States, we used to have different monetary policies for every state. In fact, prior to the 13 colonies coming together, each of them printed their own money prior to the Constitution. But under the Constitution, there's a common monetary policy for each of the 13 colonies and now each of the 50 states. That means that every year, states like New York bail out states like Mississippi. But New Yorkers understand that Mississippi is part of the United States, and for all the differences between South and North, New Yorkers rarely complain about the fact that they get half of their tax money back, while Mississippians get twice their tax money back. But Greece and Germany are not the United States of Europe. They do not feel they're the same people, and Germans resent having to pay off Greece. So our monetary policy, our Federal Reserve of the United States, has been very strong. Ben Bernanke has done a terrific job, I think, in helping us get over this second Great Recession. Greece doesn't have that luxury, and that's why it's in trouble that it is today. Thank you for your call, Dominic. I appreciate it. So getting back to the Volcker rule. Paul Volcker is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he is the person who got us out of the horrible inflation and unemployment of the 1970s. You may have wondered in the 1970s, if you remember that long ago, you may have thought, how are we ever going to get out of this mess? There's usually a trade-off between inflation and unemployment, and they're both high. How do we get into that mess, and how do we get out of it? Well, first of all, let me tell you how we got into that mess. It's really very interesting. We got into that mess from a president that, on many things I like, Lyndon Johnson, who was terrific on the war on poverty, wonderful on civil rights, not so good on Vietnam. What Lyndon Johnson did is he decided, at a time of low unemployment, he decided that he was going to have a war and not pay for it. He was going to have the war in Vietnam. And he didn't raise enough taxes to pay for the war. He raised some, but not enough. So he spent money in good times. And that's not the time to do deficit spending. As Bill Clinton knew, the time to do, when you have good times, when unemployment's low and the economy's humming along, that's when you should save. That's when you should keep a massive surplus. Because what happens when you put money into a system when unemployment is low is it just leads to inflation. And so we had high inflation. And then when unemployment went up, there was nothing to do. If unemployment is low, and you increase the money supply, then more people have more money in the system, and it actually lowers the unemployment rate. That's why, in fact, the Federal Reserve has done such a terrific job in the last few years. So Paul Volcker found the way out of the 1970s, and it was some tough love. We had our own austerity, but he managed to get us out of there. This is a guy who knows what he's doing. J.P. Morgan, the corporation that has the London Whale, and its CEO, Jamie Dimon, they didn't think much of Paul Volcker. In fact, J.P. Dimon was quoted as saying that Paul Volcker just doesn't understand capital markets. You see, bankers used to be boring. This is a wonderful article by Harold Meyerson. Bankers used to be boring because what they did, they would go in, they'd make loans to houses, they'd keep them for 30 years. It wasn't a very exciting business. It would make a little money, but not a lot of money. That's not Wall Street today. Wall Street today is all about high finance. It's all about gambling. And so Jamie Dimon is right when he told Fox Business that Wall Street, that Volcker doesn't understand today's Wall Street. Maybe not understand is the right word. Let's just say Volcker doesn't respect today's Wall Street. Because with this high-priced gambling, it means that what they're doing is when they make money, they get to keep it. And when they lose money, they come to the taxpayers for us. It's kind of like, well, what Harry Reid said, the head of the Senate. He said, there's gambling going on here. I know gambling. I'm the senator from Nevada. This is just like Las Vegas. And in doing so, he created a storm on Wall Street. Commentators on Fox and on CNBC said, how dare Harry Reid compare us to Vegas? It kind of reminds me like that old scene from Casablanca, the scene where the inspector general comes up. We have it right here, and says, I'm shocked to find out that gambling's going on here. Remember that scene? Well, he wasn't so shocked, and he shouldn't have been shocked. He shouldn't have been shocked because that's the way Wall Street works today. Wall Street makes its money from gambling. How do you think they make those massive bonuses? And it's the best kind of gambling. It's heads I win, tails you lose kind of gambling. If I make the money, I get to keep it. If I lose the money, I come to the taxpayers for it. It's exactly the kind of gambling that the Volcker Rule is designed to prevent. But it hasn't been implemented yet. In fact, the Wall Street banks have been striving to kill it. J.P. Dimon, the very week that his London Whale lost $2 billion, was arguing to regulators, you don't need this silly rule. Well, his company proved we need the rule. If you want to call in, please do, as Dominic did. Just dial 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275, locally 571-749-1166, or come on my website at marklevinetalk.com.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No. Of 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
So in reading the Wall Street Journal and reading the Washington Post and going over what is the problem, it's very interesting that the exact same instruments that caused the damage in 2008 is causing the same damage today. In fact, there's one person that was on the board of both AIG and JP Morgan when this thing happened. It was 4 years ago. Hey, we forgot the lessons of the Great Depression 60 years later when we repealed Glass-Steagall. But now we have forgotten the lessons of the most recent recession in just 4 years. So here's what the London whale was trying to do. Bruno Ixel was trying to hedge against some corporate bonds, you see. And the bankers have argued that hedging should be fine. Now, what is hedging? Hedging is when you're trying to protect your investment, right? So if a farmer has crops and that farmer, she's afraid that crops will go up or down, the price will, what does she do? She goes and she buys some financial instrument, some future that says the wheat prices will be such and such rate, no matter what they really are, and protects against risk. Hedging is supposed to lower down risk. So the London whale said, well, JP Morgan has these corporate bonds here. Let's try to hedge against the risk. Only one of the things that they got as an exception to the Volcker rule was that you could not just hedge against the risk, but you could hedge more than your risk. You could hedge on the other side. You could, in effect, buy fire insurance on your neighbor's house. Now, wouldn't you have an incentive to burn it down? If I buy insurance on my neighbor's house and it burns down, I make money when my neighbor's house burns down. And if I can light the financial fire myself, I might just do it, particularly if it's legal, which the bankers want it to be. So he's trying to hedge against these corporate bonds, and he decides to place his own little side bet, and he starts to lose. And what's interesting is the reason he starts to lose is his bets are so large that they start to influence the entire market. As I said, for every transaction, there's an equal and opposite transaction. For every buyer, there's a seller. Well, when the London whale went in the market, he created a lot of waves. He was so big, and his bets were so big, that you could see the whale coming. Everybody knew when the whale was buying. Everybody knew when the whale was selling. So the best way to make money in Wall Street was to bet against the whale, right? If you know what your opponent is doing, just play the other side of the game. And he made so many bets that the market changed. He actually changed an index fund. Now, it's important to understand what this is. An index fund is supposed to be some standard way to say whether the market is up or down, right? You have the most famous index fund is the Dow Jones Industrial Average or the Standard & Poor's 500. And it's the kind of thing that measures such a wide variety of stocks and so forth that it's supposed to reflect the overall health of the market. Unlike an individual stock where you buy a lot of that stock and that price changes, the index is the whole market. Nobody controls the whole world market. Nobody, we thought, could affect an index. That's like saying that one person could affect the whole nation's economy. How could one person affect an entire stock market? Well, if you're the London whale and you're betting $100 billion, you could actually do that. Bruno Ixel bet so much money that he actually moved the index fund up. His trades were so large that he messed up the metric. He messed up the ruler. He created a position where the index was different from the underlying stocks. Well, when that happens, you have an arbitrage opportunity. And anyone that bet against the whale was making a sure bet. The whale didn't lose $2 billion into the ether. He lost $2 billion into some very smart people's pockets who recognized exactly what he was doing. Recognize that when you make bets that big, you're not gambling anymore. You're a sure sucker, and you're going to lose your bet. So that's what happened with JP Morgan. And when Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, was asked about this, he called it a tempest in a teapot. Oh, please don't make such a big deal out of all of this. I still don't want the Volcker rule. I still want to go gambling. This is silly, over-the-top regulation. Well, he had to eat his words. And the sad thing about it is that Jamie Dimon is one of the most respected people on Wall Street. This is the ethical guy. This is the most ethical guy on Wall Street. Now you could say, well, maybe he's not so ethical. Actually, I still think he is. I just think what it shows is that he's that bad and everybody else is worse. Don't be shocked that gambling is going on in Wall Street. Don't be like the inspector in Casablanca that I'm showing on the screen, right? He knew gambling was going on. Of course he did. It was going on right under his nose. He actually put his own bets down. Don't pretend that he didn't know what he was doing. He certainly did. So what comes from all of this? Where do we go here? It's really very simple. Congress doesn't even have to pass a law. Thank God Congress already did. When the Democrats were in control of the House and the Senate, they already passed Dodd-Frank. And if you notice, one of the first things Republicans want to repeal that Romney wants to end is Dodd-Frank. Because Mitt Romney strongly believes that if he makes a bunch of money, he gets to keep it. And if he loses a bunch of money, you have to pay it. And it's a great deal for him, right? Wonderful. Heads, I win. Tails, you pay me. It really works if you're Mitt Romney. It doesn't work if you're the ordinary American taxpayer. It does not work if you don't understand what a credit derivative swap is or a hedge fund. That's why it's important to understand these things. The irony is that even when the hedge funds make profit, they only pay 15%. They don't even pay the taxes that a firefighter or a teacher or a trucker or middle class, working class people pay. So if they win, they pay less taxes than you do. And if they lose, you pay them back. You can see why a lot of people want to enter this very lucrative field. You can see why Americans that understand it want to regulate it. One of the Americans who best understand it is a woman by the name of Elizabeth Warren, who's running for senator in Massachusetts. She is the one who designed a lot of these rules to prohibit this kind of, well, gambling. The exact kind that they're fighting to do. And frankly, I think Elizabeth Warren would make a great president in 2016. She's got to win her Massachusetts race first. But here is a woman, she's so brilliant, she's so smart, but she comes from a working class background, she's down to earth. She knows how people suffer at the bottom because of mistakes at the top. She understands that 95% of the wealth created in the last decade went to the top 1%. Now, there are people out there who say, why shouldn't they? They're the job creators. Why shouldn't they make money hand over fist? How dare you try to take their money away? Well, when you understand that the system is crooked and that they're making money knowing that they're placing bets, that if they lose, you have to pay off, you can understand why we think they should be taxed a little bit higher. Or maybe these kind of practices should be prohibited. This isn't their money that they earned fair and square by the sweat of their brow. This is money they won by gaming the system. And what J.P. Morgan showed us is that the system can still be gamed. I mean, look at what just happened with Facebook. The initial public offering was a dud. Not because Facebook isn't a successful company, but because they priced it as high as they possibly could. And when people showed interest, they priced it even higher, and they let go more stock. And they did that knowing that a lot of people would go in, buy the stock, and it just wasn't worth it. See, greed prevails on Wall Street. In fact, they will tell you on Wall Street that greed is a good thing. Why shouldn't you want as much money as possible? And you know what? In the capitalist system, I'm okay with people wanting money. I'm not against people trying to get richer. But I am against people trying to get richer by gaming the system. This happens at the macro level, too. You heard Dominic talk about Greece, talk about Germany and the euro. This is happening right now between Germany and Greece. Everybody's gaming the system. In Greece, they decided they weren't going to pay their taxes. Nobody paid their taxes because they were relying on their fellow countries in the euros to bail them out. But now Greece is a mess. And Greece is a mess because Germany's being stubborn. Germany's being stubborn because their unemployment is low. Germany knows that at the same price as Greece, they are more productive, they can make better goods, and so if there were a Deutschmark and a drachma, the Deutschmark would appreciate in value, the drachma would depreciate, and those Greek goods would be competitive again. Well, Germany doesn't want Greece to be competitive. Germany wants to sell more products than Greece. So Germany is not going to lend money to Greece the way New York gives money to Mississippi every year. Germany is going to let Greece fail. Except that Greece may be too big to fail. Greece is a country. And in fact, the really scary thing is not so much Greece, which in many ways isn't as big as Bear Stearns or JP Morgan, but other countries. Countries like Spain or Italy. Italy is the 5th largest economy in the world. Italy is far too big to fail. So where do we go from here? How do we work out this system? Really, economists amazingly agree on most of this. That's the shocking thing. Yeah, they're liberal economists and they're conservative economists, but talk to Milton Friedman, the godfather of conservative economics, and he will tell you, yeah, government spending helps the economy. Yeah, you can't practice austerity, which is another word for cutting government spending or raising taxes. You can't do that in the middle of a recession. It only makes things worse. What the problem is with Greece is they were trying to make it to cut back when people were already suffering. And when you cut back government spending when people are already suffering, fewer people have jobs, less tax money goes in, more welfare payments go out, the government then loses more money, and then they try to do more austerity because they need to pay for that back, and it's a downward cycle. The trick is to do, as President Obama has said, that you spend in bad times. You save in good times. That's what Bill Clinton understood. Lyndon Johnson didn't understand that. Frankly, George Bush didn't understand that. Our times, in the beginning of his presidency, coming off that great 90s boom, coming off that great Clinton surplus, that was a terrific time to run a surplus and to save money. But Republicans, when they're in power, love government spending. Republicans, when they're in power, love massive deficits. Republicans, when they're in power, lower taxes on the super rich, and then they spend on everything from corporate welfare to oil companies, to pharmaceutical companies, to healthcare companies, to all the companies that give them money into their political campaigns. There's a reason why George Bush took us from the greatest surplus ever in American history to the greatest deficit ever in American history for a president leaving office. In 8 years, he had spent it all, and let's face it, left Obama in a hole. So some said, well, now it's time for Obama to practice austerity. That would be exactly wrong. That, in fact, would be what Herbert Hoover did. The time to balance a budget is not when the economy is bad. That's why Greece is in trouble right now. That's why we were in trouble in the Great Recession, the Great Depression. Obama understands that if you have hard times, that's the time for a stimulus. But long-term deficit reduction, when the economy gets better, is the way to go. Meanwhile, Speaker John Boehner says he wants the entire economy to collapse. Really? We'll get to that after the break.
These rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches, don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire!
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water.
At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site.
That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff.
You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go! Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People! The flood is imminent! Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. So what is the answer with all of this hedging, and what is the answer with regard to the economy? Hedging should be that. Hedging should be to protect a risk. You should be able to buy insurance on your home, but not buy insurance on your neighbor's home. What's interesting in all these hedging markets is that the vast majority of people don't own the instruments at all. They're just betting on whether somebody else fails. And that leads to a domino effect that is way too dangerous. A lot of people just don't own the bonds or anything that they're hedging. That should be prohibited. That should be the Volcker rule. That is exactly what Jamie Dimon was arguing should be allowed. Let us gamble, he said. And the answer is, you know what, Jamie? You want to go to Vegas? You got many millions of dollars. Bet it. That's fine. But don't bet my taxpayer dollars. I'll tell you who else is gambling with the economy. The Speaker of the House, John Boehner. John Boehner said just this week that if we have to default again, we'll default. If the government doesn't pay its debts, so what? We won't raise the debt ceiling. Unless I get my way, the government could default. That would be cataclysmic. That would be worse than the Great Depression. That would be worse than Herbert Hoover. That would be far worse than what happened 4 years ago. The United States government has never defaulted on a debt payment. George Washington considered it. The Revolutionary debts were quite heavy, but he paid every penny back. Abraham Lincoln had to print paper money for the first time to pay for the war against the South, the Civil War, the war to free the slaves. He had to borrow money, but he paid every penny back. And if you want to know why the United States is in a relatively good position with our economy, and Greece is in a really lousy position, is that we are the lender of last resort. When people are worried in the world, when Greece is falling apart, when Europe is through the tubes, where do investors worldwide put their money? The United States of America. It doesn't matter whether they're China or Saudi Arabia or Russian or South American or they're Australian or European. If people are worried, they put their money in the United States. Some people have suggested they put it in gold, and some people do put it in gold, but more put it in the United States. In fact, when the economy is rough, a lot of times gold prices go down because more people trust the dollar than they do gold. Why do they trust the dollar so much? Because the United States has never defaulted on its debt. Well, for the first time in American history, just a year ago, seems like longer ago, the Republicans said, you know what, psh, we could default. People like Michelle Bachmann were saying it wouldn't be that big a deal if the United States didn't pay its debts. Even though people all over the world would immediately stop investing in the United States, we don't need their money. Really? Really? Standard & Poor's did something also unprecedented in American history. And Fitch and Moody's did too. These are the ratings agencies that determine the credit worthiness of people. You know how it is. If you pay back your credit cards, you get a good credit score and you get more credit cards. If you don't pay back your credit cards, then let's face it, you have a low credit rating. It's harder to get credit. Well, the United States government has the best credit rating in the world until the Republicans last year said, maybe we won't pay our debts. And for the first time in history, not because of our deficits, not because of Social Security or Medicare or the Ryan Plan or anything, but because the Republicans suggested that we might not pay our debts, boom, our credit rating went down a notch. You'd think John Boehner would have learned his lesson. You'd think the Speaker of the House would understand this was a colossal mess. If you look at the markets, you will see that from 2009, in the depths of the recession, all the way up to 2011, the stock market grows, the economy grows, unemployment starts going down, jobs are created. And then what happens in the summer of 2011? John Boehner and the Tea Party Republicans say, maybe we won't pay our debts. The market crashes. Unemployment goes up. Just suggesting that we may not pay our debts back causes the economy to fail. And indeed, it's only a couple months ago that we managed to reach back higher than that 1 year we lost since 2011 because Michelle Bachmann and the Tea Party Republicans had the stupidity to suggest that we weren't going to pay our debts back. Well, he did it again. Just last week, Speaker John Boehner said, you know, if I don't get my way, we won't pay our debts back. Yes, it will lead to massive economic collapse. He didn't admit it, but he surely knows it would be something at least as great as the Great Depression. But you know, 30% American unemployment, food lines, selling pencils in the streets, economic collapse, which, by the way, after the Great Depression led to massive world war and fascism and communism and millions of people dead. That's funny. I want to get my way. And if I don't get my way, it's kind of like, frankly, holding a nuclear bomb over the economy and saying, if I don't get my way, we all blow up. Why would he say such a thing? Well, if you look at the polls, and you look at history, you know that the single greatest determiner of who will win the election in 2012 is not what Obama says or Romney says in debates or in their commercials or even the super PACs. It's what happens in the economy. If unemployment is low, President Obama will cruise to easy victory. If unemployment is high, Mitt Romney is likely to win. Let's face it, 45% of Americans have made up their mind they're going to vote for Obama no matter what. 45% of Americans have made up their mind they're going to vote for Romney no matter what. The 10% in the middle, it will all be dependent on the economy. If the economy fails, then the Republicans get in power. And as Rush Limbaugh said, he wants Obama to fail. As Mitch McConnell, the head of the Republicans in the Senate, said, his first goal, his first priority, it wasn't decreasing taxes or cutting spending or helping education or the environment or the military or you name it. His first goal was making sure Obama loses. So if you have a party that puts Obama's loss ahead of their own country, that puts their chance of putting their guy in power ahead of every other American, it's an unpatriotic thing. But I happen to believe the Republicans may just in the back of their minds want the economy to fail. Not all of them are as honest as Rush Limbaugh and Mitch McConnell, saying their first priority is that Obama fail, making it very clear that if America has to fail, so what? Depression, war, you name it, they want Obama to go down. But the best way to destroy the American economy, not just for next year, but for centuries to come, would be to not pay back our debts. And you know what? It's easy to pay back our debts. The Federal Reserve can just print the money to pay back our debts. You don't even have to, I mean, it'd be better maybe to cut spending or raise taxes, sure. But in a pinch, we can pay back our debts unless we are pig-headed enough to choose not to. So what's Obama to do? What's Obama to do? I mean, a terrorist with a nuclear bomb over the economy named John Boehner, a Tea Party Republican, says, we're going to destroy the nation's economy, not just for next year, but for 100 years to come. We're going to bring the world to its knees in a worldwide depression unless you give us our way. Well, a lot of people would say, you know, if you're going to push that nuclear bomb, I'll give you anything. I don't want nuclear war. And if you're serious, and I believe you're serious, and I'm not so sure John Boehner is serious because I think he understands the cataclysmic nature of not paying our debts. But if you think that the crazy man with the nuclear weapons is serious, you might just give him everything he wants. Is there a way out? What can Obama possibly do? Luckily, our greatest president ever gave us a way out. Abraham Lincoln, remember how I told you how he printed money to pay for the Civil War? Well, he and the Union at that time insisted, as a condition that the South re-enter the Union, that they pass the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, that they ratify it. Now, most people know the 14th Amendment to the Constitution is all about equal protection under the laws, and it is. It's the amendment that said that blacks are just as good as whites, that slaves, slavery was ended in the 13th Amendment, but the thing that gave slaves the same right as free people is the 14th Amendment. It's the amendment that says that everyone born here is a United States citizen. We don't have second-class citizens in America because of the 14th Amendment. That's the thing people know it for, and it's a great thing. It's the primary purpose of the 14th Amendment. But hidden in Section 4 of the 14th Amendment is a little-known provision that even President Obama hasn't cited. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment reads as follows: the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. The whole text is the validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. So obviously the purpose was to say, hey, those union debts, we're going to pay them back. But it doesn't just say the union debts incurred in suppressing insurrection will be paid back. It says the entire public debt, the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned. Not even questioned. You know, this is later than the First Amendment. One could argue that John Boehner already broke this. He questioned the validity of the public debt. Now, I don't believe that it should be taken that strongly. I don't believe if you say, maybe we shouldn't pay back our debt, that we should put handcuffs on you and put you in prison. But I do believe that this very strong language, never before invoked by a president of the United States, needs to be invoked. John Boehner threw a tantrum. We need to send John Boehner to his room. President Obama needs to make very clear that Section 4 of the 14th Amendment applies, that the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. Don't question it. We always pay back our debts. And if Congress has the audacity to say, we're going to tax you at this level and spend at this level, that's a debt authorized by law. Congress then can't come and say, we're not going to pay those debts. They just can't do it. Congress has no power to question the validity of the public debt. Nobody does. The president doesn't have that power. Congress doesn't have that power. The United States Supreme Court does not have the power. If you believe, as I do, that the Constitution of the United States is sacrosanct, if you believe, as I do, that as a strict construction, we have to obey this language, the only way to not pay the debt, the only way to default, would be to amend the Constitution, requiring a 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate and 3/4 of all state legislatures. So guess what, John Boehner? Cry all you want. Complain all you want. Wave around your nuclear bomb destroying the economy all you want. It is ineffectual because we have the Constitution. And the Constitution trumps your silliness. Now it's time for the President of the United States to use it. I hope you enjoyed the show. As I said, my name is Mark Levine. If you want to comment, please go to my website, marklevinetalk.com. You can also follow me on Twitter at marklevinetalk. I want to thank my caller, Dominic from Falls Church, and encourage you to call in, to write in, to follow me on Facebook on the Mark Levine fan page. Make your voice heard whether you agree or disagree. And hey, check me out on the radio. I'm on every Tuesday, 89.3 FM. That's called the Raucous Caucus. And you can hear the Inside Scoop every Sunday, 11 to 3 on AM 1480. Check it out.